Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, and today we are taking a bit of a detour. We're still talking about the written word, Walt, but not in a manner that we're used to talking about. It's not a biography. It's not an autobiography, though the pieces are certainly written in the first person, autobiographical in nature. Of course, if you've read the name of the episode, I'm talking about the Players Tribune, the player-only, player-written. I don't know, how would you describe the Players Tribune? Well, it's owned by Derek Jeter, and I think it's really just a lot of first-person articles by athletes, correct?
Yeah, I mean it's I think the word autobiographical, I don't know if they're all autobiographical. In the case of their wrestling section, it's most pretty much autobiographical. So
I will say I've never engaged with a lot of their stuff beyond the wrestling ones. Those are the ones that sort of circulate into my social media feeds, into my world. And that's what we're talking about today, obviously, and those are the ones we've consumed. And as you said, those are all first-person accounts written by wrestlers, people in the wrestling world, talking about their lives and their experiences.
yeah, I mean, look, I mean, books that we've read accomplish the same thing over a longer period of time and with more pages. But I think ultimately that these still serve a huge purpose and are really invaluable in their own way. Do you agree with that? I guess we'll just start talking about how we feel about them.
I do. I mean, the ones. So we're talking about a couple ones here. While we're talking about Eddie Kingston, Amanda Huber, John Huber's wife, also known as Mr. Brody Lee. We're talking about Sting, and we're talking about Jade Cargill. So they all have an AEW bent to them. Probably because it's easier to write about AEW and Tony Khan's more loose with his media requests and such than WWE. So I think that's somewhat logical. But I mean, the thing I liked about a lot of these, obviously Sting is Warren territory, but the other ones are people and stories you wouldn't necessarily know. You know, like Sting should have his own book. Like that's an easy one. Like we know a chunk of the Sting story just from reading various other books and watching documentaries and such. Like that's not anything new to I'd say either one of us. But the Eddie Kingston one in particular, that's where I first read about these. I didn't know these existed until someone, possibly you, sent me the Eddie Kingston one, and I literally was asking who the hell is Eddie Kingston, like when he came onto the scene, because I didn't know. You know, I don't follow the indies that closely where I know all these guys, and he's not even like a hot indies guy. You know, he was a older pot-bellied crazy person, and this was my first, you know, indoctrination into the Eddie Kingston story. And I remember reading it. I read it then and I read it now to record this episode, and I teared up when I was reading it because like it was so personal, it was so true to life, it was so in his own voice. Though I didn't even know his voice back then, I was like, this is clearly a man's voice. Like this isn't ghostwritten, this isn't fake, this isn't, you know, someone helping him out. This is the guy himself basically talking into direct to text, and it comes out on the screen. And I loved that. Like it was just such a great way to get a concise, powerful version of a wrestler's story and to mainline it and to take it in and then to appreciate that person so much more.
Yeah, I think in the case of Eddie Kingston's one, which was excellent, you know,
I think it's the best one. I mean,
easily.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about them all, those four in particular, and maybe you've read more, but Eddie's is the best.
Yeah, I mean, that was emotional is an understatement, but it left me wanting more. I mean, the guy has a great arc, and it just so happened that he was able to find a way to sum it up. And I mean, I don't even know how to quantify how long these are. I mean, like they're probably like short story length.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to really pinpoint
a
it,
couple thousand words, I'd say, maybe two.
Yeah. And so, you know, he did a great job of explaining stakes and why how he got started, all the major points you'd see in a book, but like he did it eloquently. He did it, like, and authenticity, I think, is like with a capital A in these, especially in the one he wrote. It's just like I felt like I was talking to this guy. The way he's like he sounds like he's crazy. The way he writes, the way his character is, it's like I don't think this is a character. I think this guy just is violent and like self-loathing and frenetic and manic, and it's just like that's who I assume this person is based on this writing.
Yeah, it really came through, and it had like in John Moxley's book Mox, it had a similar sort of. You said frenetic is another. I think I'm sure we use that to describe the Moxley book. The same sort of idea. Like
Sure.
it doesn't. It's not linear at all, but it's also not telegraphed non-linear. Like we'll talk about the Sting one later. The Sting one reads like it was written by Sting may have written it. Steve Borden may have written that. I don't really know, but it reads like it's part of a book. You know, it's like the introductory chapter to a Sting autobiography or a larger Sting story. Like it has the sort of structure where it's like. I'm on top of the world, or am I? And then then he, tells a brief
Yeah.
story from his '97 run, and then goes back in time and tells the whole story linear, just something we've read a million times before in all these books that we've taken in, and documentary style. Like that's just the way they tell some of these stories. You cut it in media res, and then you go back to the top. And Eddie's is like there is a little bit of that, like you do sort of get the whole story, but it just doesn't feel plotted out in on purpose. It's like I literally would not be surprised if he got his voice app and just started talking, and then and someone wrote it down and said, all right, that's 2,000 words, like we're good here. Like it just wouldn't, because it does not feel planned, and that just fits Eddie's life and certainly his character so much. Like he's just that kind of guy. He's not or it's not well orchestrated. It's not da 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 da, I'm gonna follow this path. It's like I'm gonna say whatever the fuck comes to my mind, and because I'm so
Yeah.
good at this and so passionate, it comes out and it really matters and it means something.
I think it helps in Eddie Kingston's case is his story is good. Like
Yes,
it's really,
it's
really
really
good.
good.
Like very unique and like yeah, it's like a
And
again,
sad, like in the ways when it like a good story can be sad. It's got all that.
it's an underdog story that has brutal honesty with regard. Like it's very. He makes me not like wrestling in some ways because I'm like, wow, this guy is so talented, and wrestling has just like done him so dirty for so long. Um, but I will say, like, I think the Sting and Eddie Kingston is a great juxtaposition of like seeing those two like back to back on the. I mean, I don't know if they're actually back to back, but like I read them back to back when looking at like the whole offering of the Players Tribune, and it's like, yeah, Sting feels. I don't think I knew that about Sting. A lot of the stuff he was confessing with his drug, like I knew he had drug problems, but like I didn't know it was like at the height of the Crow Sting. But ultimately, it's like I'm waiting for a Sting book. I don't know if we would ever get an Eddie Kingston book, especially when at the time of him writing this article, because books are typically only reserved for the highest of high stars. You're not going to get that Jade Cargill story. You're not going to get the Eddie Kingston story. You might get a Soraya Page story. You probably won't get a Sting
We
book.
got a Soraya movie already, so
Right. So there you go. That proves my point. Is but like I think this is a great platform because in Kingston's case, like his career, AEW versus the rest of his career is like very minuscule. And if you're going to invest in a book at Eddie Kingston, you want to learn about AEW, you want to learn about his time there, not necessarily like the bingo halls and VFWs and the elk lodges he used to wrestle at for 16 years. I mean, I'm sure it's interesting and there's a lot of stories, but like that's the marketing is this big star is going to tell you all these like fun stuff from AEW. And in Jade Cargill's case, like she's so new that like this article helps kind of build her brand because she is new at wrestling and she doesn't have that many stories. But like I thought this was a great introductory piece to learn more about her, who the hell this person is and how she got here and why I should care about her as a human, let alone as a character and everything else. And this is a place where those stories can live, and it isn't this 500-page investment that you're never going to get a publishing company to do because they're not worth investing in yet or ever.
Yeah, and I think that cuts the other way, though, because, I read the Jade Cargill one last of these four, and I enjoyed the other three immensely, and I like Jade Cargill. I know she's a little bit polarizing at this point, but certainly has the look and the whole presentation. Like, she's masterful at all that. Like, you look at her, and you're just like, this person should be our champion. Like, there's no doubt about that. But her story is just like, she even says it in the thing. She says, It's a little crazy talking about your life story at 29, but it feels good to write this. And it is crazy. She's only 29. She has a story worth the 2,000-ish words that are used here, but it just doesn't have the ups and downs. You know, like you said, it is a good introductory piece. Like it does flesh out who she is as a person, and I'm certainly not mad that I read it. And as a black woman in wrestling, like has certainly seen some things that most other people haven't, and can reach heights that many other black women have not. So that's all really good. Like I'm happy it exists, but it's just there's not the weight there, and she certainly, like the other ones, you could see there's more there. The other ones I left going like, ooh, I wouldn't mind, especially obviously in Sting's case, as you said, I wouldn't mind learning more about Sting. Like the Sting guy is interesting. But with Jade Cargill, I was like, this is the end of the story. Like there's no more. Even this amount of words might have been a little too much. Like I hope there's more to tell. I hope that Jade Cargill has the kind of career where in 20 years we read a Jade Cargill book. Hopefully still doing this show, but I wouldn't say there's much more meat on the Jade Cargill bone.
No, I'm not arguing there is, and I'm not arguing that her Players Tribune contribution was an A plus
Sure,
plus.
or
I mean,
Sting
like,
level, or yeah.
yeah, but what I'm saying is ultimately is this is a great plat. We talk about documentaries, we talk about books, we talk about on podcasts even sometimes. We do interviews, but it's like this Players Tribune is a platform that exists for a reason, and I think those are good examples of strong reasons why 2,000 words on someone is just as valuable for those people that aren't going to get those other treatments, and still adds tremendous value to them for their fans and as performers to just invest in them and to learn more about them. And that's what I'm trying to say ultimately is like, I would like to see more from different people just because there's less investment and you're still getting valuable takeaway.
Yes, absolutely. You're very right about that. And and the Eddie piece serves a similar entry point into a person's career. Just as we said, Eddie just had done more, and honestly, Eddie had the traditional ups and downs that you're used to. Not that Jade Cargill didn't, again, not that it was easy for her by any means, but Eddie just has mental health issues and did a decade plus in the business and being a fiery kid, getting in fights, like trouble like that. Like he just has all the stuff. He has juicy stuff, and it's part of his life. It's part of why he's so captivating now. Even if you don't really know him, you see him on screen, you're like, that guy's looks unique. Something's up with that guy. I don't know his deal, but there's no way he just walked in one day and got a job. Like he's been through some shit along the way. Jade Cargill is forging a different path, still unique, still interesting, and like you said, this is a great way to get to know her, because mostly all I knew about her before reading this, and even in the last couple of months of watching her on TV, is again her look, her presentation, her in the ring where she's fine, like a little, like it's getting better and better. Like it's just I didn't know a ton about where she came from and where they got her. I just like I said, I just visually knew like this person should matter. But it's nice to fill in those blanks. And the Players Tribune thing, however that came to be, this is a great place to do it. It's a great place to tell these sort of stories that you said aren't worthy of a book, and books are not outdated. They're still we've read so many new wrestling books, but any sort of like quote unquote authorized place to hear these, like they've been edited, they've obviously been vetted, like they're reaching out to people, like that all really helps too, because this is not some just blog people are throwing their thoughts up on. This is a publication of some reputation already, of some renown. Like it's clearly they're not just taking anybody's story. Like they want the ones that have impact. So that helps too, is you're cutting the wheat from the chaff a little bit. You're getting some stuff in there that has some meat on the bone because they've decided to run these on this site.
I would actually be curious as to the process, to be perfectly honest. Like, do they reach out to people? Do the people reach out to the Players Review and say, I have something to say? And then they go, well, let's get your pitch, and then we'll see if it's worth copy editing and proofreading and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
We, as a source, as a journalistically, we did reach out to the Players Tribune.
Yes, we should make that clear in full transparency.
For a comment. They did not comment, not because they said no comment, it's because I'm pretty sure they just didn't see our email. But ultimately, like, yeah, I think these are all really good questions because, we've talked to authors, and we do understand to a certain degree what the process is for like writing a book, and how that goes about and where that comes from. There's still a lot of question marks we have there, but ultimately, like we have a canvas with partial picture. Like this, I'm like, I have no idea how this works, but I'm curious.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if it looks like timeline wise, the Eddie one was the first AEW one that went up, and from there you can see many AEW ones that went up. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was someone's attempt to start a relationship, and then from there maybe they're the AEW media people have been in close contact with them and trying to find these stories as opposed to the Eddie one, which the Eddie Kingston thing, like we keep coming back to that, and that really is just it's such a perfect storm. Like it's just he really was the kind of person who needed this story told. Like the on-screen stuff can only do so much. Like he was a bolt of lightning. He appeared out of nowhere, and even if he I think all wrestling fans who watch that show would have loved a little backstory. And I'm sure he went on a million podcasts and did that whole run, but there is something succinct about the written word, even 2,000 words. That is not a 45-minute podcast. Like it's nice to and the first person element is a whole other thing. Like it's not someone sitting down and interviewing Eddie's friends and family and loved ones. Like there's value to that as well. But if you're a talker, if you're in the wrestling business, you should be able to tell your own story. Like maybe if you're a little green, it's not the most natural thing in the world, but it should be part and parcel of what you do. You go out there and you sell yourself every time you're on TV. Like this should be something that you should be, again, especially if you're dictating it, which who knows, but that's the vibe a lot of these come off as. It's a great medium for that sort of thing.
Well, I think that's a good differentiator too. Is like this isn't a podcast. If Eddie Kingston went on a podcast and told this story in this way, it would be like it's not because this isn't a conversation.
Yes.
This isn't an interview, which you do see online. You do see it like plenty of wrestlers do interviews when they come out with stuff all the time. Like sport like ESPN does interviews with wrestlers now and many other publications. But this isn't an interview. This isn't a podcast. This is truly a story being told and a narrative, and they're using autobiographical information and drawing from real life narrative and anecdotes and perspective to give you a pretty full story. I mean, I should specify that's kind of what the more recent additions to this wrestling tale cachet, for lack of a better term, category, bookmark, tab on the website. I'm not sure how that even
tab section is section a word you're looking for, maybe?
Probably, yeah. These are questions I would have asked them. But that's what the most recent entries are. But you do see a shift to your point from the Eddie Kingston one to more AEW, and I would also qualify non-WWE talent because Soraya wrote one of these and was not at AEW obviously, but you kind of do see that shift in because before Eddie Kingston it was primarily WWE talent. And I don't know. Did you have a chance to read any of those?
I did not. No, I'm looking at them right now, honestly, and this looks very. It definitely. I definitely see what you're saying about the shift. Like it looks more like maybe there's a little more of a hook to these. Like I see there's a Drew Mack one. I see there's a DDP one. The Charlotte one seems like it sort of has I'm Ric Flair's daughter angle to it. So it seems like maybe there's more of a sort of an angle to them as opposed to maybe like here's a little encapsulation of your story.
Yeah, it just seems like it's the PG version of what we end up getting in the Sting and Eddie Kingston. I mean, I glanced over the Dolph Ziggler one where he just talks about like finishers.
Oh yeah,
top 5 finishers.
I see Jericho did a 5 guys I fought. Like, yeah, and this is the kind of stuff I don't want to read. This is the kind of stuff I instinctually am not interested in. I mean, and there probably are people out there who would be like, I would love to know Dolph Ziggler is a wrestler. Of course, I want to know his finishers. I don't care what finishers Dolph Ziggler likes. Like, it's not part of my my desired reading material.
Right, as if he's this wrestler that has done all the finishers and has this. He's like talking about it like a fan almost.
Yeah.
But I digress. Ultimately, it's just like it's a tonal shift. It's a shift in priorities. And maybe that's just a reflection of the Players Tribune recognizing, like, oh, these WWE stories and wrestlers are under such strict guidelines with what they can say in character, out of character for us, that we would rather start working with AEW, form a relationship with them, and tell their stories because it seems like it's more kid gloves are off, and they're kind of free to kind of do the wrestlers and performers are free to kind of say what they want and be more honest. And now you have this string of the most recent five or so, or maybe less. I don't have it pulled
Five-ish,
up.
a little more. It looks,
Five-ish,
yeah, it looks about five.
where you're getting like truly honest details about these people's lives, which I think is a better shift for sure.
Yep, absolutely. Like it's, I'm glad you informed me that these exist. I could have obviously hit the show more button on their wrestling section site, but
Yeah.
if I had clicked show more and seen these, I would have been like, I am not even going to bother with these. I might have done it out of curiosity, like you said. I might have opened one of the listicle seeming ones just to get a sense of, is this as listicle as it sounds? And I probably would have said, yep, sure is. Anyway, gotta go, because the ones that I read that have an AEW bent, like, who knows what it is. We shouldn't speculate too much because it would be just like, this is obviously not a show where we say, oh, WCW censored, or WCW.
Yeah.
Yeah, they probably would have let him do whatever the hell they wanted to, but this is
Yeah.
not
They
a.
probably wouldn't. They probably wouldn't even have known that one of the wrestlers
Yes,
did this.
they would have gotten the Players Tribune emails in their inboxes and just let it sit unread for months, probably. So. But I mean, it's easy to say WWE censorship, AEW free and open, like that. We don't know how much that is really the case. But the point is that the AEW ones are powerful and thoughtful and valuable and honest. And the one we haven't talked about that I sort of brought up at the top is the John Huber one, the Brody Lee one, the Luke Harper one, written by his wife Amanda. And that one is first person. She's still writing as herself, but it's telling the story of her husband mostly, with her own story in there as well, and their marriage, and how they met, and how they evolved as wrestlers, and how Luke Harper, Brody Lee went on to great things in multiple promotions. But I thought hers was that's the other one that I teared up at and reading them again today, is because it's just you really get the sense of what a guy he was, and not just all rose-colored glasses. Not just my husband was the sweetest, most wonderful man in the world. Like, there's a lot of, we had our ups and downs, and he broke my heart, and then we got back together, and it was years, decades long of us being in love and navigating life's challenges, and him navigating the wrestling world. Like, again, it's just very, very heartfelt and very real. Like, not sugarcoating anything, not saying, even for someone who's passed away, not saying, not making him seem like an angel who is sent to make all our lives better and be sweet and never had a rough edge. And I think that is just a real, like, when I read something like that about someone and still also get the love and the tenderness and the sweetness and why everyone cared about him so much, and why everyone in and like the outside stories of other wrestlers getting involved, and his health issues and beyond, like, it's just, there's so much weight to that. Like, it really, it touches my heart, and it means something, and it paints a picture. And another kudos to the Players Room for giving the avenue to her to tell the story of a wrestler who was beloved in certain circles but not known by many people at all. Like, new to the main event scene, like, a long time WWE mid-carder. Like, you wouldn't think they'd give his widow a place to tell his story. Like, I don't think that is top of people's list of tales they need to tell. But here it is, and it's wonderful.
Former Bludgeon brother.
Former Bludgeon brother. Let's not sully his legacy by bringing up the Bludgies too much.
No, of course not. But no,
tag champs though, they were telling we can't take that away.
Yeah, they had a WrestleMania squash match, respectively. But yeah, I mean, that's one I read a long time ago, and I didn't get a chance to revisit it ahead of recording this. But like, that does raise an interesting question. It's like, I don't think the Players Tribune would go out of their way to, like, poke or ask the mourning widow of John Huber to, like, to write this. This is kind of something that you kind of have to offer, right?
Yeah, you have to assume AEW, someone that must have been a collaboration. Like, I highly doubt that they it feels like that's why I think it's safe to assume that if not a relationship, there's just an open line of communication between Players Tribune and AEW, and that's how this came to be. I wouldn't think there's any other way to do this.
Right. That is that is fair. But I mean, yeah, another I guess piece here that like has tremendous value, super emotional, uh, and what did this? I mean, could someone write a book about this guy? Like, yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, but will it happen? Like, probably not. And these accounts are so personal, and it's more. It goes beyond just like recapping highlights and facts from someone's and anecdotes from someone's life. Like these recent ones have a level of emotion and personal uh, affect that like I think goes that lives in a sector that's different than book in many ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and they're just different types of stories, Like we said, the books typically follow not always rigid, but somewhat formulaic. I don't think most like Moxley being the one sort of departure from that, but a lot of these books aren't reinventing the wheel. Even the ones we like, the Young Bucks book, for example, was not. Was pretty standard in terms of the way they tell the story. It's just they're good characters, and they're very they kept track of things. They're very upfront about the stuff, and they've done a lot. So I think theirs stood out for because they're such big characters in modern wrestling, and because of all they've accomplished in such a young age, their book had a little more weight to it. But a lot of them are just sort of da 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 da, and a lot of them are veterans, like we sort of hinted at, like a Sting book makes sense, like a Lex Luger, but people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and have been around forever and have stories to tell, have name value, have a reason for publishers and everyone to get involved in them writing a book. Those are we've just heard so many of those stories before. We've heard not ever. I wouldn't say we've heard so many goddamn 80s and 90s stories. Like there's only so much your brain can handle. There's only so much enjoyment you can get from all of this. Like it's just the same old stuff, or variations on the same theme. So to read something about, I mean, we've read Keith's book about the Indies. Like we've read Keith Elliott Greenberg, our friend. We've read other books that are more modern that have that sort of hook to them that I find much more intriguing. And these shorter versions that touch on stuff that I don't already know. Like I just love consuming wrestling content about something I haven't heard 10 times before. And a lot of these do that. They touch on new people that I don't really know, and they tell me things that I'd like to learn. And it's not fit for a book, but this is a great avenue for that sort of storytelling.
Yeah, and also too, like I feel like certain wrestling books that have come out that you know, I don't want to say are like this because this Players Tribune articles are not books and books are not that, but like, like Moxley's book, 2,000, 4,000 to 4,000 words on this topic. And then we move on to a new topic. And so effectively the book is done in chapters, but not chronologically. And they're kind of one-offs, but they come to a logical conclusion at the end of each chapter. And it's like, Keith's book is very similar in a sense that like the one, I guess I should specify the Too Sweet Indie Revolution, but like that, those are kind of digestible in a similar way where it's like short, sweet. Here's GCW, 2,000 words on GCW. And in a book we're going to talk about in a future episode, Brian Gewirtz, he hates that, but it's part of the book. He'll read it, but like it's very, very similar. Like it's very self-contained chapters where we're not connecting the dots. It's just this is a story and a part of this guy's life. Moving on to the next thing that doesn't necessarily connect to the first thing, and so like I feel like that's the way I kind of like reading wrestling stories and absorbing wrestling content, not necessarily the typical how you outline in the Bucks book.
Not every story needs to be like I was born in Rancho Cucamonga, and when I was 6 I watched WrestleMania 10, and when I was like we don't need to hit every miniature milestone along the way.
Yeah, I mean not to disparage the Bucks.
No, the Bucks are great, friends of the show.
Friends of the show. Their execution of this format was better than most, if not all, other wrestlers because of the way they did it. They were unique. Tag team, they had 2 different voices going back and forth. But like even in that iteration, this feels refreshing. And so ultimately, what I'm trying to say is 2,000 to 4,000 words feels like a more digestible way to hear stories in this space versus the traditional way we've read them for many, 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 many years.
Yep. And I will say, well, I don't know if you're aware of this. Sting has a book. Did you know this?
Of course, I did.
It's called Sting. So you know about Sting Moment of Truth?
Oh, how long ago was that?
It was 18 years ago, and it's 128 pages long. So Sting has a
Wow.
pamphlet, I guess, is what we're likely to say.
Yeah.
Though space-wise, if we're talking about short is better, that is not a long book. So I do appreciate his brevity, probably. But I mean, I'd almost rather, not that it's. I'm sure there's a lot of good stuff in there too, and maybe one day we'll be completely out of topics and we'll loop back to Sting. But he does a great job in this short version. Like that's plenty of Sting. Like I don't feel like he doesn't. I feel like a book would just again stop at those milestones that are relevant to him, maybe not the best for the story. Whereas this, there's a lot of there's fast forwarding, there's cutting between things, and I feel like he hits on the stuff he has to hit on, and then he's to the next plot point that sort of ties back to the last one. Like you're allowed to make big narrative leaps like that when you're trying to condense it to a certain amount of words.
Yeah, and like I hate to make this comparison, but like I will just for the sake of discussion, is like it just feels like a really well done wiki where it's like we hit the highlights. Like yeah, like obviously there's a ton of Sting stories that he could share between the years of Beach Bash or Beach Brawl or
Beach
whatever the one,
Blast,
Beach Blast,
where he
and
teamed with the
like
British Bulldog.
yeah, and Crow Sting.
Yeah.
But like, we didn't need to like I didn't if I never get those stories, I still feel like this is a good Players Tribune article he wrote is a good representation of his career and his greatest triumphs and his lowest lows and everything in between, or not everything in between, but like the major points in between. Um, you know, I think there's plenty more meat on the bone of Sting, but like if I don't get that, I feel like I have a pretty basic understanding of what this guy's career in totality of where he started, how it how it how his career took off, and like a really big moment of struggle, and then how he overcame it. Like, isn't that kind of what everybody's wrestling tales is or are in some way? Like, and so I feel like if I don't fill in the blanks of this story, like I've got a good sense of like where this guy has come from and has where we are now.
Especially the immediacy of it too. Like, and then we won't ramble too much about it. I think we've covered these been very in depth,
Sure.
which has been great. But obviously, Sting wrote a story about he had a lot of troubles. He overcame them, and then flash forward. Now we're in AEW, and things are great, and it's so fun to be wrestling at 60. My kids love it, and here I am. Like it's if Sting wanted to write another book, he'd have to sit down for a year and write a bunch of stuff down, and then who knows if he'll be retired by then? Like who knows where he's gonna be? Is he gonna be hurt? Is he gonna be still liking AEW? Is he gonna sour? Like there's a niceness that he just is able to tell the story while he's sort of on top again in AEW, and then wash his hands of it and move along. And I think that's great. Like, we don't need, like, you think about it, and some of these books are good, but like Jericho's book, JR's book, like, people love, now that another trend is splitting your life up into quadrants, or little bits. Like, here's this book, and then I did this other stuff, and here's another book. Foley again with the TNA book that we covered on this very show.
Foley again.
Foley is part of that whole thing. Foley, the book machine, it's just not, it's just not, sometimes not all that deserves that treatment. And so to Sting to make it concise and give it all to us here at this moment in time where he's doing his thing just makes so much more sense. Like it's nice to check in with Sting and find out that he's enjoying himself, loves AEW, loves being healthy, loves jumping through tables at 62, and call it a day. It's a time and a place and a moment, and you get a tidbit and you like it and you move on. Like it's on the internet, but it's not a quick bite. It's not in and out. It has weight to it. It has meaning, but it doesn't doesn't require the whole process of the book, putting together and then us taking a month to read it, and like it's just that's not the right avenue for all of this.
It doesn't overstay its welcome,
Yep.
I think, is the best way to really put all these. And in some cases, it could have stayed an extra night,
Yeah.
or hour, or
Yeah.
whatever the metaphor is referred to.
But not a week, not a month, but just yeah,
Yeah.
could have had an extra 24 hours.
So I guess the only question I really have left for you, um, as much as I like to really, really dissect every nook and cranny of these 2,000 word essays, um, is who would you want to see one of these done for?
That's a great question. Trying to think of someone who is new-ish and has a story to unveil, but maybe like because I would love to read a CM Punk book someday, and CM
Right.
Punk is a man with grievances, as we're finding out, in real time right now. A lot going on in his head. By the time you listen to this episode, who knows what'll have happened in between? We're recording slightly in advance, so who the hell knows about Punk? But I think he'll do it someday because I'm sure he's going to want to air some of them and share some dirty laundry, and he's a man with a lot of thoughts in that noggin. So I'm trying to think of someone who has less of a maybe like a Hangman Page, maybe someone in that, or someone in that. I think mid carders, Page is a little bit more of a main eventer now sometimes, but I think it's a good mid card area. Like I think someone like a Tommaso Ciampa or a Johnny Gargano, I'd like to hear like they seem like they'd have that past behind them, that story behind them, like how they got to where they are right now. Especially now that they're both on the big show, they both made the main event, like they both matter, like they're on Raw, they're on SmackDown. I think they would have they could condense part of their story, I bet, down to a nice little chunk, but still leave the future open for more. Like it's just here's how we got here. Here's a tidbit from now that encapsulates it, and then more to come someday. They probably have a whole book in them, but they're the kind of guys that I think could do something like this to tell, like, it could even be the whole hook could be what a relief it is. Now we're thanks to the current WWE structure, we have somehow made the main show despite being 5'10". 5'9". So I would love to take on those guys. Did you have somebody in mind when you asked that question, or?
Oh, I didn't actually. I probably should think of that real quick.
It's a good
I
question.
I think there's plenty of people in AEW, that probably have similar stories to Eddie Kingston. To be honest, I mean, I feel like less in WWE, but like you're right, like maybe a Gargano or Ciampa would be good, but like,
I mean, hell, maybe Austin Theory has a good story. Who the hell knows?
does he
I
though?
don't know. He was in like Evolve, wasn't he? Is that good?
So he just did an indie, but
Yeah.
most people did it.
Yeah, that's true.
I'd have to noodle that one. I think you were onto something with Paige, like maybe even like
Like, I'd be
maybe even
curious to
like
see Paige, like, because when he first, came on the AEW scene and got the title shot with Jericho, everyone was like, get this guy out of our face. And then organically, as we've covered in previous episodes, he became a guy everyone loved, Like, they sort of followed the breadcrumbs and figured it out. I'd love to know what his head was like at that point. Like, if he felt like he was being rejected, if he was okay with the patient process, like, I'd be very curious about stuff like that.
yeah, or like maybe even like, I mean, this might be a great example or not a great example, or like the ones that come into my head are like Pac or Phoenix and Penta, just because I like those guys and talk about like indie guys, top, but also international. There could be an interesting story there that's might be a little different. Um,
Pac also had the WWE run that ended awkwardly. Like he's actually a really I've never heard any hide nor hair of him sharing those stories, but I would love to know
yeah,
if he could talk with a little openness about what happened there.
yeah, and then I would say there's one in top of my mind. Maybe like Revival. I know that's
Mmm.
FTR. There's another one that I wanted to point
Miro?
out. Miro would be good. I feel like with his Twitch channel,
Yeah, I bet
he's
Miro's
pretty out
Miro's
there.
story is probably out there pretty openly at this. I wouldn't be surprised if he's talked about it a bunch. I just haven't don't know it.
Right.
Anyone who
Also an
had
international guy.
anyone who had success, in WWE and then had it sort of muted, and then now is doing better or is happier. Like I'd just be curious to. Those are the kind of and they don't have to sell it as again. They don't have to air grievances, but I would just be curious, where their head was at all this, like how it affected them.
The only other two I would think of is like I could see like a good one with Jungle Boy just talking about his dad and just like how being in the shadow of like this like super famous Hollywood actor. I guess he's Hollywood, right? Luke Perry. I mean,
sure.
I don't know what movies he did.
Hollywood is TV is Hollywood still.
In the early '90s. I mean, I hope so.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, but that or like, I would like to see like maybe an Orange Cassidy one, but like done in character potentially. But that would be too much.
Maybe not insufferably in character though. Maybe like somewhat in character, but also somewhat. And not just
Somewhat,
like the
yeah.
you all. Yeah, I mean that would be a fine line to sort of walk. And if he tried to do it as Orange Cassidy, but also as I have no idea what Orange Cassidy's real name is. Do you?
No idea.
Yeah, I've never even seen that mentioned. I'm sure he has a real name, and I'm sure he could write under it. But yeah, I'd like to maybe see him do a little bit in a blasé style, but also tell a story. So yeah, because I mean, anyone or Darby. Who knows about Darby? I know Sting mentions Darby a little bit, but anyone who's had Jungle Boy is another great example. Like they have no grievances to air necessarily. They just have AEW has propelled them to fame in ways they were probably never even approached before. So that would be all those stories would be wonderful to hear. Just how their lives have changed in the last 2 years.
And hopefully this working relationship continues and we get more interesting stories like that because. Yeah, I mean, I didn't have anyone top of mind when I asked that question stupidly, as if I didn't know we were doing this podcast for 2 weeks. But, just from us, just riffing right now, we just came up with some viable contenders that would make for some pretty damn compelling narrative. So
yeah, and to tie it back to what we do here, like the reason we do this show and why we've been doing it for years now is because most of these stories, the bad ones sort of weigh on you, and the monotony and the repetition can be exhausting. But usually these are great. This is a great world for this type of storytelling. Like this is how I got here. Is 90% of the time is good. Like I would not necessarily pick up a baseball player's biography or a football player's biography on a whim because I'm like, I don't like how many of you have good stories. Like there's so many of you, like you went to school, you played football, you got drafted. Like how like so many of those I feel like are extremely repetitious and extremely whatever. But wrestling lends itself to all this stuff. Like it's a weird, wild world, and the people who choose to get into it are fascinating. How the roads they travel are usually wild and windy. Like it's such a good avenue to hear someone's life story. And so it's the kind of thing where like there probably are dozens of these just because it's short, it's sweet, and like and the background of all these people is usually at least somewhat intriguing.
Yeah, I mean
we wouldn't be doing this otherwise, right?
That's a mission statement for this podcast.
Yeah.
Wrestling stories are better than baseball player stories. I
think it's
but
an
it's true.
objective fact.
I'd say that jokingly, but it's. I mean, I don't know if we've got 100 episodes of baseball players.
Yeah. No,
I would not want to do that.
I would not want to do that show. So I'm glad we do this instead. So there you go. If you want to read more about these, if you haven't consumed them yet, if you've heard about them on social media and you haven't taken them down, there's the section it's thePlayersTribune.com, and there's a wrestling section. So go and check it out. It is really, really great. So especially the most recent ones, like Walt said, if you want to dip into the other ones, Godspeed, good luck to you. But the recent ones, Sting and Eddie Kingston and Amanda Huber in general, and Jade Cargill to a lesser extent, are all excellent. Like, and hopefully there's more to come. Like, this is just such a good way to deliver wrestling stories. So hopefully they will keep coming. And if there's some really good ones, now we've opened the dam, so we'll start talking about them. So we will cover them in detail, but we want to just give them a little bit of a focus because they've been very, very entertaining and well done so far. So check those out. And of course, if you want more Awesome Truth, you can find our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are delivered. And please rate and review us on those apps. I know Spotify has a rating service now. Apple Podcasts obviously has one for a long time. So please rate and review us if you get the chance. It really helps. It'll help us rise up the rankings and get more listeners. So we really appreciate it. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at AwesomeTruthPod. Well, great to talk Players Tribune with you. And as you noted, Brian Gewirtz is the hot new wrestling book. So when will we cover it? TBD. But we will cover it soon. So if you're interested in prepping for an awesome truth to come, Brian Gewirtz's book is available, and it will be covered before long.
Yeah, get excited for it. I'm halfway through right now. It's going to be a good one.
I'm 0% through, so I need to catch up.
Sorry, didn't mean to put you on blast there.
No, it's okay. I'm glad you're moving so fast. I'll catch up, and we'll get to it. It's a Labor Day read at the very least. So
there it is. Yeah, for all your Labor Day funds.
Yeah,
or travels. Like that's
For your Labor Day funds and travels, check that out. Thank you all so much for listening, and remember, the truth will set you free.